The silence of space stretched endlessly around the Vanguard as it drifted through the vast emptiness. The ship was ancient now, its hull battered by the years, spent in exile. The crew's ancestors had long since passed, yet their bloodline continued, the descendants of a humanity lost to the stars. They had lived for centuries in this quiet solitude, never knowing if their homeworld still existed or if any other humans survived. The galaxy was a different place, now controlled by alien empires whose very names were only whispered in the old history books. The only connection to their past was the ship itself, an ancient relic of a bygone war, its engines powered by technology humans had long since forgotten. As the Vanguard passed through the dark expanse, a distant signal began to pulse through the ship's communication systems. Faint, barely noticeable, yet unmistakable, a cry for help from a distant world. Earth was alive. It was a message that stirred the soul of every crew member. No one dared speak it aloud, but in their hearts they all knew it could be their only chance to reclaim what was lost after so many millennia of silence. They were not the last humanity had survived, but for how long? The captain of the Vanguard, Captain Serena Locke, stood at the helm, her hands trembling slightly as she gazed at the star chart. Before her, her face was a mask of determination, yet her mind was filled with questions and doubts. What would they find when they arrived? Would the world they remembered still be there? Would humanity still be a force? Or had they been forgotten entirely beneath the rule of alien overlords? She turned to the officer standing beside her, a young lieutenant who had never known the Earth his ancestors had left behind. Lieutenant Thorne had grown up in the cold emptiness of space, with only stories and records to fuel his curiosity about the lost world. Serena knew he was just as eager as the rest of them to finally see their home planet once more. Lieutenant Thorne, are we ready to make the jump? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Yes, Captain Locke replied, her voice steady. We're ready for whatever comes next. But as the ship's engines roared to life and the stars outside began to warp and bend, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown pressing in on her. Was this the right decision? What if they were walking straight into a trap? What if Earth had fallen under the control of a foreign power, and humanity's return would be nothing more than a spark that ignited a new war? The crew was divided. Some were eager to face whatever threats lay ahead. Others were more hesitant, fearing what might have become of their once proud civilization. Serena locked her gaze on the dark expanse ahead of them. There would be no turning back now. They had come too far. The ship trembled as the jump was initiated. The Vanguard surged forward with a force that rattled the bones of the crew. Captain Locke clenched her fists. She had made the decision now. It was time to see it through. The Vanguard emerged from the jump into a vast empty space. No familiar stars, no signs of life, just the cold emptiness that stretched on in every direction. Captain Locke stared at the empty void, feeling a mix of fear and anticipation. They had crossed the boundary into the heart of the galaxy, yet all she could see were the faint flickers of distant lights. The ship's systems hummed softly around her, as if the Vanguard itself was as uncertain about this journey as she was. The crew had gathered on the bridge waiting for instructions. The silence between them was deafening, as if they were all waiting for the other to say the first words. No one dared speak. Captain Locke finally broke the quiet, her voice steady though her mind raced. Set a course for the coordinates. The signal came from Lieutenant Thorne, nodded at once and began inputting the data they had retrieved. The signal was weak, but it had been enough to guide them this far. Whatever had sent it out was still there somewhere ahead of them. They would find it, and with it the answers they so desperately needed. The stars began to shift as the Vanguard adjusted its trajectory towards the unknown. It was a journey fraught with danger and uncertainty. No one knew what they would find at the end, but every one of them knew that humanity's future hinged on this mission. The ship glided silently through the darkness, its engines humming steadily beneath them for what felt like an eternity. But every hour that passed brought them closer to something greater than any of them could imagine. Captain Locke leaned forward in her seat, her eyes fixed on the data stream in front of her. Her heart beat faster as the distance to their destination shortened. Their mission was becoming real, and yet she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The closer they got, the more it felt as though the galaxy itself was holding its breath. She wasn't alone in her unease. The rest of the crew was beginning to show signs of strain. Whispers passed between them As they worked, some exchanged uneasy glances. When they thought no one was looking, there were murmurs of doubt circulating through the ranks. Not everyone believed in the mission. Not everyone believed they should be here. Some of the younger crew members wondered if they were chasing ghosts. What if Earth was nothing more than a legend now? What if the signal they had found was just a trick, a piece of ancient technology malfunctioning and sending out random transmissions? What if they were returning to nothing more than an empty planet lost to time? Serena took a deep breath, pushing the doubts aside as captain. She couldn't afford to let the crew see her hesitation. They had to believe they were on the right path. They had to believe that humanity's survival depended on this journey. The silence on the bridge was broken only by the quiet hum of the Vanguard's engines. But then something unexpected happened. A faint signal interrupted the ship's communication systems. It wasn't the same distress signal they had followed. It was a different frequency, older and more sophisticated. A sharp burst of static followed by a voice. It was human. Captain Locke's heart skipped a beat as the words crackled over the comms. The voice was faint, but unmistakable. It was a message sent from Earth. After all this time, they weren't alone. Someone had survived. They were not the last of humanity. The voice on the comms crackled again, this time clearer and more urgent. It was human, no doubt about it. Captain Locke's heart raced as she leaned forward. Every crew member on the bridge held their breath, waiting for the next words to come through. It sounded like a message of distress. Something was wrong. The voice on the other end spoke quickly in a hurried and broken tone. "We're still here, but we're not safe. They found us again. Please, if anyone hears this, come quickly. We can't last much longer." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The crew exchanged looks, their eyes wide with disbelief. They weren't the last humans. After all, the voice was proof of that. But it also raised more questions. Who were these survivors? And what was happening on Earth? Captain Locke stood up abruptly, her mind racing. She turned to Lieutenant Thorne, who had already started working on triangulating the signal's origin status on the transmission. He asked quickly. Captain Locke's voice was firm. As she answered, "We're going after them." She didn't hesitate, her instincts telling her this was no coincidence. They were not only returning to a galaxy they didn't recognize, but also into a situation they couldn't yet understand. What could have happened to Earth that had left its survivors in such a state? Locke's thoughts were interrupted by the shrill alarm that echoed across the ship. The sensors had detected something large moving toward them rapidly. The crew froze, fear creeping into their hearts. Could it be a fleet? No, the signature was different, smaller and faster, yet still powerful enough to shake the very hull of the Vanguard. The sensors lit up with incoming data. They were being targeted. Locke's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. A surge of adrenaline rushed through her, the feeling of being hunted, the same feeling she had experienced when the Great War had raged and humanity's enemies closed in. It wasn't just the Vanguard they were after, it was humanity itself. With no time to spare, Locke barked orders to the crew, her voice sharp and clear. "Red alert. All crew to battle stations." She turned toward the front viewports and saw a distant flash, a small ship darting toward them, faster than the eye could follow. The ship's design was unlike anything they had encountered before, sleek and angular, with weapons that seemed built for speed and precision. A voice crackled over the comms again, this time cold and calculating, a warning, not a plea. "This is the Aeroth Dominion. You are intruding on our territory. Leave now or face annihilation." The Aeroth Dominion. Captain Locke's blood ran cold. She had heard of them, the terrifying force that had conquered much of the galaxy during humanity's fall. Their name was synonymous with fear and subjugation. The last time humanity had faced them, it had ended in exile. But this time things were different. Humanity wasn't powerless anymore. They had returned to a galaxy that didn't recognize them, and they would have to fight for their place in it. There was no turning back now. The Aeroth ship loomed closer, and the tension on the bridge grew thick. The crew worked quickly, preparing the Vanguard for battle. Locke knew this wouldn't be an easy fight. They had come too far to turn back. But could they truly survive against the might of the Aeroth Dominion? The captain turned toward her crew with resolve. It was time to show the galaxy that humanity was back, and they would not be erased again. The Vanguard shook as the first blast from the Aeroth ship hit its shields. Captain Locke's grip tightened on the control panel. She could feel the force of the impact through the ship's hull, and in the tension of every crew member around her, The crew scrambled to respond to the sudden attack. Weapon systems powered up, and the engines roared to life, pushing the ship into evasive maneuvers. But the Aeroth were relentless. Their ship was faster and more maneuverable. It twisted and turned with unnatural agility, its weapons firing in rapid succession. A barrage of plasma blasts struck the Vanguard's shields and sent a ripple of energy through the entire ship. The crew struggled to maintain control. The ship's systems flickered, warning lights flashing across every console. The force of the impacts was pushing them to their limits. Captain Locke's mind raced. They had to escape the Aeroth, or they would be destroyed. They couldn't afford a full-scale battle. Not yet. They weren't ready to face such an overwhelming force. The Vanguard had been built for war, but it was not invincible. They needed time to regroup and figure out their next move. Locke gave the order: evasive maneuvers, full speed ahead. The ship lurched as the engines roared to life. They shot forward, hoping to outrun the Aeroth vessel. But the alien ship was not so easily shaken off. It followed in hot pursuit, cutting through space with terrifying precision. Locke's pulse quickened. The minutes seemed to stretch on forever as they raced through the void, a deadly game of cat and mouse in the cold expanse of space. But even as they tried to escape, it became clear the Aeroth would not stop until they were destroyed. The voice of the Aeroth commander crackled over the comms again, this time colder and more threatening. "We have given you a chance to leave now. You will pay for your intrusion. There is no place for humanity here." The words sent a chill down Locke's spine, but they also ignited something inside her, a fire she hadn't felt since the first days of the Great War. Humanity had been exiled to the edges of the galaxy to live in isolation for centuries, but they were no longer powerless. They were not the last humans anymore, and they would not be erased without a fight. She turned to Lieutenant Thorne. "Give me a status on our weapon systems." Thorne worked quickly, tapping commands into his console. "Weapons are online, but they're not a match for the Aeroth firepower." Captain Locke thought for a moment, then looked out at the vastness of space ahead of them. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was their only shot. She turned back to Thorne. "Prepare the cloaking device and initiate a full-speed charge. On my mark. When we hit the gas cloud, I want you to cloak us and change our trajectory to a 90-degree angle. If we can lose them in the gas, we'll have a better shot of hiding until we can find a safer spot to regroup." Thorne didn't hesitate. "Understood, Captain," he said. Captain Locke breathed deeply. She had given the order, and now it was up to the crew to execute the plan. They had to survive long enough to reach their destination. The stars stretched on ahead, but the Vanguard was no longer alone. The Aeroth were closing in fast, and humanity's fight was just beginning. The Vanguard sped toward the dense gas cloud, a swirling mass of colors and gases that could hide them for just long enough to evade the Aeroth. The engines strained as they pushed to maximum capacity. Captain Locke's eyes were fixed on the approaching cloud, her fingers white-knuckled around the command panel. Everything hinged on this moment. The ship shuddered under another blast from the Aeroth, the shields flaring bright as the power began to drain rapidly. "We won't make it much longer," Lieutenant Thorne said urgently, his voice tight with the pressure. They had only moments before the shields collapsed completely. Locke's mind raced through every possible option. There was no turning back. They had to make it to the cloud now, or the Aeroth would finish them off. She looked at Thorne with steely resolve. "Do it now." She commanded. His hands moved swiftly over the controls. The cloaking device powered up, and the ship's systems hummed in response. Just as another shot from the Aeroth warship slammed into the shields, the ship's exterior shimmered briefly before it vanished into the cloud. A sudden silence filled the bridge. The crew exhaled as one. The Vanguard had disappeared from the Aeroth's radar, at least for the moment, but they couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. The gas cloud was dense and disorienting even for a ship as advanced as the Vanguard. The crew had to rely on their instincts to navigate through the swirling mists around them. The ship lurched again. This time, the force came from within. A sudden tremor ran through the hull, and systems flickered throughout the ship. Reports began coming in from engineering. A malfunction in the cloaking device. The sudden strain had caused a power surge. They were no longer fully cloaked. The ship's presence was being partially detected. Captain Locke cursed under her breath. "We can't keep this up long," she said. The tension was rising again. The Aeroth ship would be closing, and soon the Vanguard's damaged systems could barely hold on. They couldn't outrun the era for much longer. Captain Locke knew they needed to find a way to turn the tables, to make them believe humanity wasn't worth the effort to hunt down and destroy. Lieutenant Thorne was the first to break the silence. "Captain, we could use the cloud's electromagnetic properties to mask our energy signature. If we adjust the shields, we can make ourselves nearly invisible to the Aeroth for a short time," he suggested. It was a long shot, but it might just buy them enough time to regroup and plan their next move. Locke looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Do it," she said. The crew worked quickly, moving to adjust the ship's systems to take advantage of the gas cloud's natural properties. The ship's systems hummed and whined under the strain as the adjustments were made. Every second felt like an eternity when the Aeroth warship would inevitably detect them again. Locke couldn't stop the thought that haunted her mind. This was a dangerous game they were playing. They couldn't stay in the gas cloud forever, and eventually the Aeroth would catch up. The Vanguard's survival depended on the crew's ability to adapt and make decisions on the fly. It was humanity's strength that had always set them apart, their ability to survive against overwhelming odds, and to fight even when the odds seemed impossible. The quiet hum of the ship was the only sound in the bridge as the crew held their breath and waited for the Aeroth to make their next move. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, their lives in the balance. Captain Locke stared at the screen ahead of her, the gas cloud swirling in the viewports, and in her mind the road ahead was unclear. But she knew one thing for certain: humanity had been exiled once, but they would not go down without a fight. Not today, not ever. The tension in the bridge was palpable. The crew remained silent as they monitored their surroundings, waiting for any sign that the Aeroth were closing in. They had adjusted the ship's energy signature as best as they could, but the feeling of vulnerability still lingered. Every hum of the Vanguard systems felt like a warning, but as the moments passed, it seemed like the Aeroth ship had lost their trail. For now, they were in the clear, but only for a little while longer. Captain Locke exhaled slowly, allowing herself a brief moment of relief. But she knew this was only temporary. She turned her attention back to the task ahead. They couldn't stay in the gas cloud forever, and they couldn't risk being found again, not when they were so close to the Earth and its survivors. "Lieutenant Thorne, how much longer can we stay hidden in the cloud?" she asked. Thorne's face was tense as he ran the calculations. "It's hard to say, Captain. The energy drain is significant. If we stay here much longer, we'll risk burning out the cloaking device entirely. The Aeroth will find us before we can make another jump." Locke's mind raced. They didn't have much time. If they were going to reach Earth and find out what had happened, they had to move now. But the danger of the Aeroth was still looming. They had to make a decision whether to fight or flee. What if the Aeroth were already on Earth waiting for them? Would they be too late to help humanity's survivors? She couldn't let that happen. "We'll take the risk," she decided, her voice firm. "Thorne, prepare for the jump. We'll head for the coordinates we intercepted earlier." The crew moved into action without hesitation. Thorne entered the new course and locked the coordinates onto the ship's navigation system. The Vanguard's engines began to hum louder as they prepared for another jump, but Captain Locke couldn't shake the unease gnawing at the back of her mind. The Aeroth had hunted them. Once they would be hunting them again. The moment they dropped out of the jump, there was no guarantee they would have the advantage. The cloaking device might not hold up a second time, and if they were forced into a fight with the Aeroth in their current state, they might not survive. But Earth was their destination, and they had no other choice. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They had come too far to back down. Now Locke gave the order to initiate the jump, and with a roar of the engines, the Vanguard surged forward once again. The stars stretched and bent as the ship shot through the vastness of space. The crew remained tense, knowing that what awaited them at the other end could change everything. It could be salvation, or it could be their end, but the gamble had been made, and there was no turning back. Captain Locke stared ahead at the swirling lights of the jump, feeling her heart race as the Vanguard tore through the stars. She was leading them into the unknown, but she would not falter. Humanity's fate was in her hands, and she would see it through no matter what the universe threw at them. The Vanguard dropped out of the jump with a violent jolt, sending a shiver through the ship. Captain Locke gripped the armrest as the crew worked quickly to stabilize the ship. Their surroundings were nothing like they expected. The stars ahead were distant and cold the familiar constellations of humanity's home, no longer in sight. Instead, the view was dominated by a dark and barren world. In the distance, Earth was barely visible, a pale blue dot, surrounded by the wreckage of ships and scattered debris. It was as if the planet itself had been torn apart. The silence that followed was deafening. The crew had been so sure they would find a thriving world, one waiting for their return. But what they saw was a world scarred by war and desolation. Their home was no longer the blue gem they remembered. Captain Locke's throat tightened as she stared at the view before her. It was almost unrecognizable. Her heart sank. She could see no signs of life. No cities or lights, only the wreckage of battles long past, a graveyard in space, a place where humanity had fought and died without even knowing if anyone would ever return. She felt a deep pain in her chest, the reality of their situation hitting her harder than she expected. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing had prepared her for this. The world she had dreamt of was gone. The voice of Lieutenant Thorne broke through the quiet. "Captain, there's something on the edge of the atmosphere. A signal, it's faint, but it's there." Locke quickly snapped her attention back to the monitor and saw a flickering signal emanating from what appeared to be an abandoned structure on the planet's surface, a makeshift outpost hidden in the remnants of Earth's shattered cities. A spark of hope flickered in her chest. "Is it human?" she asked. Thorne was already running the data, trying to get a clearer reading. "It looks like it, Captain," he said, his voice shaky. "It's coming from a surface facility in the ruins of old New York." Locke didn't hesitate. She gave the order, "Prepare a landing party. Get the shuttle ready." "Lieutenant Thorne, you're with me." As the crew scrambled to prepare for the landing, the weight of the situation pressed on Locke's shoulders. They were about to make contact with the last survivors of humanity, and she had no idea what she would find down there. Would they be the same people who had fought the Aeroth before, or would they have become something else, something unrecognizable? In the aftermath of Earth's destruction, the thought troubled her, but there was no time to dwell on it. Now they had come this far, they had to see it through. Thorne gave her a quick nod as he worked alongside the crew to ready the shuttle. The engines powered up, and the small craft detached from the vanguard. The shuttle sped toward the surface of Earth, cutting through the atmosphere at breakneck speed. The ground below grew larger and more distinct, the outlines of ruined cities stretching out before them. As they neared their destination, Locke's mind raced. What kind of world had they returned to? Who were these survivors? And what had become of humanity in the years they had been gone? As the shuttle descended through the smoky sky, Captain Locke knew one thing for sure: no matter what awaited them on the surface, they had to make their presence known. Humanity had survived, and they would not let the galaxy forget it. The shuttle's descent was rough. The atmosphere around Earth was turbulent, the air thick with the remnants of long-forgotten wars, debris from fallen ships scattered across the sky. The ground below was a mix of shattered buildings and scarred landscapes, remnants of humanity's greatest achievements, reduced to rubble. Captain Locke gripped the seat tightly as the shuttle shook with every bump, but her determination didn't waver. They were close. The signal was stronger now, pulsing like a heartbeat, guiding them to their destination. Lieutenant Thorne sat at her side, eyes scanning the instruments. "Captain, we're approaching the landing site. It's just ahead." She nodded sharply, eyes fixed on the looming ruins of old New York, the once vibrant city, now a shell of its former self. The shuttle's engines roared as it slowed, preparing for landing. The tension was thick in the air. Each passing second felt heavier than the last. Every member of the crew knew the significance of this moment. They were about to make contact with the last remnants of humanity, and they all wondered what they would find. Captain Locke could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but nothing had prepared her for the sight that lay ahead. She saw what was once a bustling metropolis, now reduced to a ghost town, skeletal buildings reaching up into the sky, as if they were pleading for help. She had never seen anything like it. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud. The doors opened, and the crew stepped out onto the cracked and broken Earth. The air was thick with dust. The sky was gray, as if it had been stained by years of conflict. The ground was littered with pieces of twisted metal from destroyed ships and shattered infrastructure. The world was hauntingly still. Captain Locke felt a chill run down her spine as she looked out over the desolation. But then a voice broke through the silence, a gruff and weathered voice Calling out from the shadows, Captain Locke looked up to see a figure emerge from the ruins, a man hunched and scarred by years of survival, but unmistakably human. He was wearing a suit of battered and improvised armor, and he approached them slowly as if unsure whether to trust them or not. Locke took a step forward, holding her hands out in a gesture of peace. "We come in peace," she said, her voice steady and calm. The man stopped just a few feet away, his eyes scanning the group before finally landing on Locke's face. He didn't say anything at first, just stared as if trying to decipher if they were real or some cruel trick. But then his expression softened slightly. "It's been so long since we've seen anyone," he said, his voice raspy with exhaustion. "You're the first to come back after all these years." The words hit Locke like a punch to the gut. The first to come back. He didn't know humanity had never truly left the galaxy, had forgotten them, cast them out into exile. While they fought to survive, now they had returned. And this man, and the others with him, were the last remnants of a world that had once been vibrant and full of life. The weight of their return hit her all at once. She knew they had a lot of work ahead of them to rebuild and to face the future. But as she looked at the man and saw the hope in his eyes, she realized this was only the beginning of humanity's journey. The galaxy had forgotten them, but humanity was back, and they were not going to fade into history. They would rebuild, they would fight, and they would make sure the galaxy knew they had returned.